Hi, I'm Sandy Ray, founder of Sandra E. Ray, CPA, where we alleviate financial headaches so that you can create a bigger impact. Today, we're going to talk about Form 990 preparation tips. Preparing your annual Form 990 seems like a mountain that you have to climb every year. Today, we're sharing some tips to make that mountain easier to climb. We all know that we have this burden of our annual filing requirement with the IRS and various state governments, and that the 990 is a public disclosure document where donors and watchdog organizations are watching us. But we have an obligation to the public because we're tax exempt from income taxes. And so this is just a requirement that we have to have every year. But I want you to think of this as a way to promote your organization. While today's topic really is on how to promote your organization, I always want you to keep that in mind. So let's get started. I like to think of completing the 990 as an all-year thing. I mean, this form has 12 different parts and additional schedules if you answer yes to some questions. So it is a big document and it is time consuming. But like any project, I want to break it down into smaller steps and I want to do it over time. I like to organize information into one central location. So as you're doing things through the year and you come across something and you think, oh, I need that for the Form 990, make an extra copy and put it in your 990 file. And that's, as you know, just as simple as a copy paste kind of thing. So it's really easy to do. The things that you want to keep in mind when you're building your 990 file during the year are sometimes unusual things, like maybe you're making changes to your mission statement or your bylaws. Once those are approved, get them in the 990 file. Do we have a new program that we need to have a description about? Get that written up as part of what you presented to the board to bring this new program into existence or to the grantor. Put that documentation into your 990 file so it's there, it's easy to grab, you don't have to remember where you put that. Every year we're going to need a board of directors list. Put that in your 990 file. We're going to need to have the number of W-2s we issued. So I always like to put a copy of my W-3 in the 990 file. I also need copies of the W-2s for any officers or employees who made $100,000 or more. And I want to be clear on this. It's any officer, no matter the amount, and additional employees of $100,000 or more. Another item that we need to put in there is we need to know how many 1099s we filed. So I always put the 1096 in there. And again, any copies of 1099s for independent contractors that earned $100,000 or more, I want those in my 1099 folder as well, because those will have to be listed. Now, a great starting point for our 990 is last year's filing. Well, then we just have to tweak it. It's like coming up with this, grant application or a donor letter. It's very difficult to come up with the first draft, but the second and third drafts are updating and changing and making it better. And that's the way we want to look at the 990 as well. Another factor in the 990 is, do you have an independent financial audit? And if you do, you're going to have to wait for that to be completed. And you're going to have to make sure all those audit adjustments are posted. And I would put a copy of the audit in the 990 folder. Now I want to talk about some of the financial information that you're going to need and how we get it. We talk a lot about your chart of accounts and how you're tagging information in your accounting system. While we're building those systems and building those customized reports, we need to be thinking about the 990 as well. So I want to go over a few things that we need to make sure that our accounting system can handle. The first thing I want to talk about is unrelated business income. If we have any unrelated business income, we need reports that show us the income and expense related to that activity so that we can complete the 990T. For our program services, we need the income and expenses by program so that we can complete those program service accomplishments with those descriptions, and then we include the income and expenses. And another piece for that is any grants that we awarded. We have to pull those out separately from the expenses. So if in the program you awarded any grants, those have to be reported as well. Then in our donor management system, we need donors who gave cumulative gifts of $5,000 or more over the last 5 years. We also need to identify donors who are disqualified. And by disqualified, generally that's super large donors, over 2%. They gave over 2% of the total gifts over the last 5 years. And we also need to identify them for our Schedule B for the current year for reporting if we're required to do a Schedule B. For that, we're going to need addresses of our major donors. Information like that can be easily pulled out of our donor management system. You need those kinds of reports. We need expenses related to public policy and advocacy. If we're doing those kinds of things, we need to be pulling them out of the accounting system so that we can put them on the 990. If you have any activities outside of the US and they're significant, again, we're going to have to report that on the 990. So we need to be able to pull that information out of the accounting system. And then, of course, our fundraising events. We have to have our income and expenses related to our fundraising events. As you know, those are reported net on the Form 990, and they're pulled out of the expenses for our statement of functional expenses. We need to identify and value our non-cash gifts. Does our accounting system track that, or our donor management system? Do they track that? And do we have the ability to put that in our 990 in a very easy manner? Related party transactions. Do we have any related parties, and what are the transactions between the two? Do we have an easy way to identify those transactions? Another source of transactions we need to identify is with our governing members, their families, or businesses. So if we've got some of those types of transactions going on, it's not disallowed, but we have to report that, and we have to say, yes, there were transactions. And if they were significant, we have to describe what those transactions were. Now, if you have any rental income, like real or personal property, again, that gets reported on a separate form, so we have to be able to pull that activity out. Did you sell any assets that weren't inventory, like if you had a store? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, did you sell some computers or some desks? Those kinds of things. We have to track that activity separately. And then, of course, charitable gaming. If you had any charitable gaming activity, we need to pull that activity out and be able to report that. Now, that's a lot for our accounting system, and there's a lot of reports. So there's a lot of detail that we need to get into and then be able to pull that information out with our customized reports. For non-financial information, there's some things that we're going to need that are really critical. And the first one is our program service accomplishments. We need statistical information, and we need to be able to describe what those public service accomplishments are. This is the opportunity for you to brag about your organization, how well you've done this year, and what you were able to get done. And again, here we've talked about any changes in our governing documents. We need to keep track of those. Any new policies and procedures. Maybe last year we didn't have a records retention policy, and this year we do. So we need to make sure that those kinds of things get in our 990 folder. Now, in addition to having a folder and working on this over time and really setting up these systems for success, we need to have a project manager, someone who's responsible for making sure that the 990 gets completed on time. Now, this person doesn't necessarily have to have the expertise to actually complete the form, but they do need to be able to provide information to the person who can. And that I recommend that the person who actually completes the form is somebody with nonprofit experience, maybe a CPA who has done 990s before. Because just like I would never attempt to do a tax return for a bank, I don't think that type of CPA should be doing 990s either. They are just as complicated. And unless you're familiar with what the IRS requirements are, it's easily to put the wrong information on the form or in the wrong place. Your project manager, we want to make sure that that person does have access to all the necessary information. And my big concern is the compensation. Is this person high enough in your organization that they have access to the officer and key employee compensation information? If you're looking at someone who you don't want to have access to that, then you probably ought to pick somebody else as your project manager. And then your project manager needs to understand the filing requirements and be aware of the deadline. So generally, we're talking about 990s, but there's state filing requirements and deadlines as well, and it can get pretty complicated. And then, does this person have the authority to implement or recommend changes in your accounting system, your donor system, your financial reporting system that will make the gathering of this information more efficient for your organization and more cost effective? So in summary, I want to say I liked to prepare for the 990 the way I prepare for financial audits. I do the work all year long. I recommend you tweak your accounting system and your customized financial reports to pull information that you need for the 990 with a click of a button. Also, look at your donor management system. Are you putting information in there the way you need to be putting it in so that we can pull information out for the 990 and cumulative gifts over 1 year, over 5 years? And can we do that with a click of a button and really rely on that information? If we're just doing a dump into Excel and sorting and figuring it out ourselves, I mean, that's doable, but it's not efficient. Thirdly, keep a folder of all the documents that you're going to need to answer the questions on the Form 990, and do it when you have access to it. Now, one of the things we didn't talk about is estimated number of volunteers. So make sure that when we get done with that volunteer log or we're trying to do some sort of calculation, that goes in our 990 folder. And know who is responsible for completing the 990. Have a project manager who has enough authority to get the job done. And finally, this is my favorite tip about the 990. Don't forget to brag about your organization and your accomplishments for the year. This will make donors excited to support your organization. I hope this was helpful, and I want to thank you for joining me today. Remember, creating a bigger impact starts with stopping the nonsense. If you're dealing with nonsense in your nonprofit organization, we'd love to help you cut through the noise.